Hello, everyone. Sorry for the technical issues and being just a bit late. Welcome to this roundtable called Agrivoltaicsme to combine solar energy and agriculture. So please draw for me a beautiful PV project. This is what I asked each speaker this afternoon, and which of them is bringing a different angle to this very complex subject. Agrivoltaism, a new object, a new topic that is not clearly identified yet by the French law, but it is getting clearer and clearer. A concept that holds a lot of hopes for the agriculture sector to mitigate the effect of global warming by shading, to energy, because it opens a range of new possibilities. A professional trade union estimated that agrivoltaism could represent 80 gigawatts by 2050. Let's remind us that for the whole of the PV sector, the president has given us again 100 gigawatts in France by 2030. We're only at 18 gigawatts. Agrivoltaism, a new subject that is already old for a lot of the people in the general public. A lot of agriculture farmers say that nothing grows when there are too much shades. Some people say that it's not going to work because they're left alone with a tractor and they're not being supported. The image of agrivoltaism is suffering from its excesses and by a romantic vision of the agricultural landscape in France. But the challenges are too high, so we can stay blocked in those stereotypes. So this afternoon, we're not going to defend a lobby for agrivoltaism or defend or ban it. We're just going to explore the results of the experiments that have been conducted so far, and humbly with our speakers, we will try to imagine a beautiful agrivoltaic project. And we're going to ask ourselves the question on the land use, on sharing resources. We're going to see as well how this topic of agrivoltaism can modify deeply the approach of developers of solar energy. So let's, without further ado, let's open up the first session. We're going to see on the agricultural side, I'm going to call 3 people to join me on stage. I invite Audrey Juliac, who's a farmer, who's the president of the French Association of Farmers, Luc Janin, vice president of the Agriculture Chamber of Saône-et-Loire, and Blandine THUEL, who's a manager of France AGRIVOLTAISME. Hello to the 3 of you. And we're going to start with you, Blandine THUEL, because you are representing both the 2 trade unions of this sector, France AGRIVOLTAISME. This is an association created in June 2001 to protect a fair and sustainable agrivoltaism. Am I correct? Yes, absolutely. So you're a member of the board, where we find the FSNE at the president, and the governance of agrivoltaism is shared by 3 tiers: agriculture, energy, and technology. And you are also the president of the CSR Commission. In our collective project this afternoon to imagine a beautiful agrivoltaic product, you have the task to give us the legal framework. How can we develop such a project in France, and how is it different from a traditional project in agricultural land? Well, yes, it is quite a big task that is given to me. And I would like to reassure everyone, in the next 10 minutes, you will not know anything more about the legal framework, because we are in a phase that is still very blurry. No, can you hear me? I don't hear the sound, but if you hear me, that can carry on. Sorry. So it's not in 10 minutes today that we will be able to do a recap of the regulation, the French regulation, because we're really in a tricky phase when we're waiting for the decrees to be released after the last law of last February. And in this framework, we wanted to say that we're in a transition phase with a draft decree that will be discussed on December 19 that will clarify a number of assessments. So it would make agrivoltaicism at the service of agriculture with direct services that need to be linked to farmers with a commitment to obtain results from an agricultural point of view, and it's clearly stated in the draft decree. And also there will be assessments of those projects. So generally speaking, what we can retain from this draft decree that is still being studied is we have a clarification of the cover rate with a maximum threshold at 40%, but that will have different mechanism depending on the size of the project and the technologies. There's a new word that just came out. It's the proven technologies. What are proven technologies? With a law that should also be released next spring. So all of this makes the understanding of the decree even more complicated, because these proven technologies are going to lay out a number of issues. So I'm sure there'll be some questions in the room. A drop maximum of 10% of the farming production. So nobody planned that there would be a drop of production with the panels. Yes, no, this decrease was anticipated. We cannot accept more than 10% decrease. In some cases, we'll have to show an improvement of quality. So the decrease is not enough. In the PV projects, there's a benefit that will have to be proven as well and showed. So we're also going to talk about test areas. We're going to talk about micro projects, and that seem to obtain some derogations more easily. So all of this does not necessarily clarify right now the type of regulation on agri-PV. And we're also expecting the definition of a decrease on proven technologies. We also know that this regulation is pending a number of additional regulations. You have them here on the screen. The law on the decrees, on the project committee, the decree on zero artificial. This one, artificialization, is very hard to pronounce. It's a ZAN project. And then other topics that need to be clarified, on which agrivoltaicism has drawn attention. The contracts linked to the agri-PV projects. So we're actually working on a new lease, agricultural lease, specifically dedicated to this types of project. Yes, so we'll go back to that when we study more land use. So this is the French legislation. We are still a lot of questions pending. But we have a tool at the service of agriculture, and agriculture must really bring out added value and show an added value. So that's really what we're focusing on for the agricultural world sector. Yes. What do you mean by this added value? Is it difficult to define? Well, it depends on what added value we're talking about. Is it collective added value for the region? So there are different issues here and different questions, but this concept of added value is important. If we look at the legislation in Europe and in the US, a lot of European countries have started wondering about agrivoltaicism. So if we look at the three major countries in the most developed on agrivoltaicism, Spain, Italy, or Germany, there are some very different regulatory systems. Some tend to produce more laws and more rules to make differences between different types of agrivoltaicism. But there's a real will to standardize and speak with a common voice at the European level, with an agreement that was signed with the three associations, Germany, Italy, and Spain, and France Agrivoltaicism, to standardize our speeches and have a better clarity of the agricultural challenges, because it also touches upon the European legislation. It could bring differences and tensions in terms of farming. Yes, it could, and it's important that we are aligned on that. And the last point, because we'll always look at the other continents. In the US, there are no legislation to date. There are many experiences, and there's going to be also an agrivoltaic conference in Denver, so it would be maybe the chance to standardize those definitions at a European and international level. So maybe we're going to start with taking a few questions in the room. If anybody wants to understand better this framework, this legal framework that is coming out. I wanted to have a quick Q&A, and then we can get more into details, because these data are completely new. We had a general definition to say that, okay, let's give priority to agriculture. Once we've said it, what do we do about it? So now it's becoming more concrete. Who wants to ask the first question? Hello. My question is, my question was on what you called proven technologies. If we want to keep innovation in France, are we not going to block the innovation system if we only select some technologies versus others? The notion of proven technologies will clarify a number of processes, particularly those that are favorable to agriculture under the panels. We don't know the level of details. Within the proven technologies, is going to be a tracker at 6 meters distance from another one, from the culture, or for any types of production. We don't know exactly what are going to be the categories in these in these proven technologies. So I have a hard time answering you, but it clarifies a number of elements, particularly on the decision-making entities. The PNAF, those are commissions. Not everybody knows the acronym. In each department in France, co-presided by the prefect, who gives an opinion on the land planning projects. And the voice of agriculture is, of course, very important. But what really matters is those entities are waiting also for more tools to be able to select the files and know which ones are the most relevant and the most sustainable for the agriculture, and to make available a listing of proven technology on some cultures that will also clarify, and it would prevent everybody to build data separately. It will pool the data. And the new technologies, of course, will need to find their own framework, and maybe with different implementations methods, and that will be different from one region to the next. So the call for tenders for the innovation maybe will be evolving. so we don't stay stuck on the solution that are existing just now. Another question on those decrees and all that? Yes, there's a question at the back. Hello, Madame THUEL. Do we know how do we calculate the coverage rate? Is it the PV modules, or is it an islet that take into account the distance between each table? If we read the decree properly, it is really the projection of the panels on the ground. So it's not the definition from an agricultural point of view of the coverage of a plot of land. That was a very precise question and a very precise answer. Another one? If there are no further questions, maybe we move on. Maybe Blandine, you can tell us a word on what you're presenting to us now. This is the general framework. Another question somewhere? Yes? We listen to you. Hello? How are we going to do? What are we going to do with the projects that have vertical projects because they don't have any projection on the ground, and the semi-transparent panels because we don't take them into account in our projection? I would like to clarify that I'm a researcher, and we proposed to the ministry a method to take that into account, and it was declined. I am not the ministry, so this draft decree, yes, we regretted that these precisions didn't take into account some technological evolutions. If we read as is the decree, the production of vertical panels are 0. And so they're less than 40%, so they may be considered proven technologies for some production. So this one is not really an issue, but the evolution of technologies such as the transparent panels and films are not taken into account, and maybe we have to wait for 1 year for the patent to have this listing of proven technologies. We'll have to wait to see if those evolution are being listed, like those transparent films that will probably reduce the thresholds for certain technologies that over time will become proven technologies. I really hope that will be the case, because this is the reason how we'll maintain innovation going. And we saw that in 3 years, technical innovation has made some major progress in the agricultural sector. So I really share your wish to take all these specificities into account. A question that I could have missed in the room? No? I have a question for you to illustrate the slide. On the environmental side, we want to protect the quality of environmental soils. What does that mean concretely? You take one of the major goals of the CSR good practices book. The idea is to highlight good practices, considering that we're a new sector and everybody's expecting what we're going to come up with. There are a lot of changes in uses and landscapes. And the first projects that are being presented, and that's what we'll get back to when this decree will be adopted and when we can start implementing all that. It is very important that all the actors are aware of the goals and the challenges, and that all the social, ecological challenges are taken into account in the first file, so we can use virtuous examples such as the challenges of biodiversity, of quality of the soil. Those are extremely important. So those are the challenges that we need to look after, and to be able to let the machines go onto the plots and to be able to work the soil, those types of practices. So having set the framework, which is not final yet, but is evolving. Let's look at the colors that we want to put in our painting. Do we want to put some green, some blue? I'm turning to you, Luc Janin, to have the vision of an agricultural land in France. You are vice president of the Chamber of Agriculture of Saône-et-Loire, which is the region in France that has a lot of cows, a lot of cattle. So you are represented also in an entity to steer at the region level this project. So 3 years ago, the president of your Chamber of Agriculture has given you a task to set up a working group on a question, the very precise question, agrivoltaics. Why did he ask you to do this task? And what results did you achieve? Yes, hello everyone. Yes, 2 years ago, the question was raised, agrivoltaics. We didn't have the definition of it. So it took us a few months to really understand what it means. But we were quite efficient because it took longer to the French state to come up with a definition than it did for us. The question that we had is, do we want to have some panels in our fields in our region? And the general answer of all the farmers 2 years ago was no. In majority, they answered no. We're here to produce food. We're not here to produce energy. So we thought, well, we can maybe oppose that project, but it's going to happen one day, and we won't be presenting a united front. So we thought, let's rather think about what issues make us say no, what are going to be the blocking points, and the benefits. So we thought of a sentence that was leading our reflection, and that summarizes all what we ask from a government or administration. Why not satisfy the energy sovereignty of our country as long as it doesn't impact our food sovereignty? So we solved our dilemma. So now it's up to the state to address it. So our biggest worry as young farmers is, how can a young farmer have access to land lease if there's a huge financial burden because of all these panels? It's going to add another difficulty. Yes, we felt like the young farmers will not have access to that because they will be put aside. And how do you transmit an agrivoltaic plot of land in the traditional way of passing down agriculture land? So first we try to address all these issues and questions and then go from there. So how did your working group work, and what are its conclusions? We met regularly with team members from legal or technical background to ask ourselves the good questions, and then we also listen to the young farmers to say, what are your main concerns? The access to land for the young farmers. Then the second thing that was a concern was the protection of the farmer. This is going to make farmers vulnerable compared to the people who own the land, because they are not always the owner of the land that they grow, that they work on. Yes, we have some landowners that exploit their land, and some that rent it out to farmers. So that would make them vulnerable. And we thought, no, can't hear you any longer. So we decided to protect the farmer because we didn't want the farmer to be expelled or anything like that. And then we went even further by thinking we also have to protect the landowner, because the landowner, at the end of the project, he needs to be protected. A fourth concern that came up very quickly is how to share value. How do we make sure that the biggest number of farmers can benefit from it, but also society? So how can we not concentrate the resource on a few projects, but share the resource? And also the last one is how society going to accept it? Because if we do some projects that have a visual impact that is too strong, people are going to oppose them like they do for other projects at the moment. So, okay, I put myself in the shoes of a developer or somebody who's interested in going ahead with a project. But how do you share the resources among farmers? What does that imply in your working group? That means that in terms of numbers, we don't want more than between 5 to 10 megawatts, per farm. And they came back saying we need 30. Well, we said, will you put then 3 farmers together to get 30 megawatts? Because we don't want to, we want to take our share, but we want to be adjusted to the size of our property. Is it set in stone? Well, in our heads, yes. When we told that a few times to the prefect, he said, you're not the ones who are going to write the law. And we said, no, of course, but we defend the profession, and we feel that the other members of this this commission are aligned with our idea of sharing and remaining reasonable. And that should be a project for the region. So how do you make a project accepted in the agricultural sector? How can it be aligned with what the towns, the regions want?
Construite, mais on sait.
We haven't explored all the avenues yet, but yesterday I was at the prefecture and the COGNIEZ, the electrification syndicate, working with local authorities, has set up a system which might mean that between the farmer that wants to use agrivoltaics, the local authority, which is a partner, and the local consumer, between them there can be a cause and effect link with an electricity bill that would be less for the people who are living in that community and that local authority. So in relation to the cost of energy, we're talking about this. Obviously, it's a bit like the decree framework system, but yes, but the acceptability aspect is really at the heart of this of our studies, and we want to be able to set up elements concerning the stakeholders in the territory, and one of them is the involvement of the population in these projects. Thank you very much, Luc Jana. We're going to be continuing to talk about your work and this interesting vision of the department. Thank you for coming. For it to be perfectly open, it's very difficult today to get representatives from the farming world, people from the Chamber of Agriculture, get them to come to talk at a panel discussion about a subject which is a major issue, but one which is produces anxiety. So in the name of all the organizers, thank you very much for coming along and sharing your points of view. So before the Q&A session from the room, we're going to be continuing with this view of the farming world with a more committed point of view in favor of solar installations on farmland. André Juliac, we're going to try and make sure you have a mic that works. So, as I said, you are a farmer. You do market gardening in the Lot-et-Garonne area, and you are the new chairwoman of the French Federation of Agrivoltaic Producers. This is an association that was set up in 2021. and including its missions was to give priority to agricultural land and the reality of the agricultural project under panels. So the board, this is very important, the board of administration is important. It's interesting to look at the way it's steered, but it translates this governance into a priority with 21 centers, 16 of which are occupied by farmers and 5 by developers. Cédric, I'd like to start by asking you what are the farmers afraid of when they commit to a project, an agrivoltaic project? What guides them? Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for your invitation. I'd just like to add to what you said in relation to governance of the FFPA. It's important for the farmers to state their claims and projects, and the project is only made up of the board is made up of farmers for this reason. What we're afraid of, what are we looking for when we move towards an agrivoltaic project? There are several things. First of all, there are advantages, undeniable advantage from an economical point of view. For instance, to fight against hail, frost, evapotranspiration, drought, etc. And it also makes it possible to reconvert to, for instance, somebody who wants to produce corn and there maybe can convert to sheep rearing, for example, using PV panels. So this is an example which is taken directly from your own experience. Absolutely, my neighbor is producing non-conventional maize. It's no longer really profitable, and he's thinking of converting to sheep rearing. His son wants to do it, so he can't do that. He doesn't have the investment capacity to do it, but with a PV project, he will be able to do so. So there's reconversion in terms of farming, but it's also important to be able to have access to land, which is particularly important for young farmers. They need working capital as well, and it shows us the extent to which we are dependent on the market, particularly in cereals and meat. It also makes it possible to have some funds for your farming project. We know that in the agricultural world, we're attached to our land, and it's often transmitted from one generation to the next. This may be an obstacle from an emotional point of view. There's also a problem with the artificialization of land. Once the plant has been taken down and we revert to farming activities, or perhaps will I end up with concrete patches everywhere on my land? This is one of the fears, and this is one of the reasons why it's more or less acceptable. And this is the way it's perceived by the local authorities. This is one of the major fears. And also how, as a farmer, often people are very much alone. What's my position in the face of multinationals who often make offers with contracts that really can, give you lots of hope. And this is the position of FFPA, to really take a stance next to the farmers at the same time as including legal experts, people involved in energy science, to make sure that each project is in the interests of the farmers. So in relation to the land question, there's a question of transmission from father to son or from generation to generation. This may be difficult to transmit. And also in terms of speculation, because we hear sometimes about huge rents, for example. This may just be a rumor. This may or may not be true. We need to really make the distinction between truth and fantasy. And how do we work on the basis of a contract, of a contractual relationship? Do we include certain values or a range of values? Are these some of the things which are possible or even desirable what are the avenues that you're working on? Well, apart in terms of attributing the land, tools do exist which we need to use. I'm thinking about the SAFER organization, who has real decision rights in terms of whether or not to allow a farm to set up on land. We also have to look at the scale to really know what we're talking about. The PV installations will concern a section, something like 135,000, i.e. 0.35% of the territory, overall territory for agricultural land. When we think about speculative capacity, there is speculation that represents 0.35. So I think we have to be careful that we get the right scale, because on a local level, this can create an imbalance between neighbors and can create enmity. I think that if we have an agricultural project, agri-PV, where we have the impression that we're going to be offering a lot of money to one particular farmer, whereas the others won't, this won't be accepted because it would be completely unfair. But there is the question of sharing the value which comes in, and the developers who create projects and the value that's created by these projects should be sent to the territory. Some of it comes back to the local authority, some to the umbrella organization, and another part to the farming world. This is still part of the debate. Perhaps in Cumin, in the chambers of agriculture. What's your own view? Well, the view of myself and the FFPA as well, i.e. the farmers, is that when we give money to the farming world, this money has to get to the field. It mustn't get lost in different institutions, which it's very important that part of this money goes to the various institutions, but it also has to come back to the farmers themselves. It's not yet included in the decree, but this is what is the topic of the working group that's working at the moment. They're getting around the table to discuss this issue, but the idea is to create a fund with steering committees. We're talking earlier about with my neighbor about helping to fund panels on farming buildings, for instance, because sometimes we want to put panels on roofs. We can't because we have to get rid of asbestos or for other reasons. And these funds could be used for this purpose. Why not? We looked at very local areas, for example. We have very violent, very local weather conditions. Why not use these funds for helping people who are affected by these weather conditions? And so these projects must not only benefit a single farmer and one single farm, obviously. Thank you. So I think we can move on to the Q&A session now. This is very much part of our farming approach and the approach of agri-PV. There's a man with a hat on, so he's easy to pick out of the crowd. Hello, everybody. Patrick Sauvé. I'd like to come back to one of the things that you said, which I completely agree with. I agree with Madame Jouyek about the question of sharing the value and all the other aspects. But by breaking things down in this way, we're tending to destructure the whole initiative, which was to accelerate the deployment of renewables at the same time as participating in the general effort against everything to do with climate change. So Jean-Luc Bocuse, I read recently a report which I think it was brought out by the INRA or the ADEME, which said that it would be good to have at the maximum 20% of cover by PV panels. I'm working on the basis that if we consider that below 20% it would be beyond 20% it would be harmful, the first 20% has to operate well, and rather than questioning this system. I think the danger is, if I think it's important for other people perhaps to be able to ask questions. Basically, if I can summarize what you said, are we overdoing it? Are we too afraid to move, to accelerate? Too afraid? Certain people say from the farming world and a number of legislators, this is perfectly normal because people need to be protected. There are real issues at stake. Are we doing too much? The aim of this legislation is the acceleration of this law, which came out in March, based on renewables, with the idea of getting around the table as quickly as possible to get projects up and running. Our aim is to make sure that the law exists and that it's strict enough to avoid projects that you were referring to in your opening remarks, and yet flexible enough to allow for innovation. It's a difficult process to keep to this thread, and things can get complicated. There are a lot of different issues at stake here. I was talking with an agronomist earlier who was talking about a farmer using PV, and his project might be delayed by 2 years because of legislative reasons. This is not acceptable. We quite agree on that. So this is why we want to get these decrees to move forward as quickly as possible. We're very pleased with what's already happened, obviously, but now that this this law has come out, we want to be able to deploy it quickly in close alliance with the ADEME. I quite agree with you that if there's too much legislation, we'll never get PV projects up and running. There's a question over here. And another one just over here. Is it about an agricultural compensation as it already exists? Is it for projects which respond to agrivoltaics in relation to the decree, which will be coming out in the coming months? Compensation paid by whom? Sorry, compensation paid by whom? By the developer? Could be by the developers at the time of the development and construction of the project. So yes, thank you very much for your question. Yes, in fact, there are compensations which are planned for in the law in relation to the loss of yield. This is between the owner, the farmer, and the ex-farmer, where there may, in fact, be compensation. We talk about this in the decree, but in real terms, this is something that will be covered by the law. But the spirit of the law already is the idea of compensation. From an economic point of view, any loss or lack would be compensated for. Another question over there? Thank you very much for having a chance to speak. I'd like to ask the three speakers in terms of their positions in relation to agrivoltaic, in terms of the marriage between sun and agriculture. This means perhaps a revolution in terms of the farming system. Earlier, Madame Julia was talking about the transition, the shift from growing corn to sheep rearing, for instance, and even in terms of the spectacular transition of moving from beef rearing to sheep rearing. And I think that this is something which is acceptable today. What's your position in terms of this transition? And what answers can we bring to any objections that this might raise? Maybe if I could just say a word here, because these are often questions that our operators have, saying, okay, we have somebody who's rearing cattle and wanting to raise sheep. It could be a very good agri-PV project. I'm sorry, but I do really want to speak of it from a farming point of view. And to give you a parallel, it's like asking somebody who's a plasterer to come along and to become an electrician from one day to the next. Raising sheep or raising cattle are not at all the same thing. And so in concrete terms, this is why it's not acceptable. On the other hand, if the person proposing the farming project wants to shift and wants to create a workshop which is part of their agricultural project, in this case there are synergies, and we have the possibility of a sustainable farming system which can include an agrivoltaic aspect. So this is the rather than having a developer finds a nice piece of agricultural land and said, hey, we can put PV panels, we have a farmer who says, hey, I wouldn't mind transferring my model. Wouldn't somebody like to come along and help me? Absolutely. And the question really is, I'll hand over the mic, but when we're called on by an operator saying, I have a great agri-PV project on this piece of land, this department, we're going to do such and such a project. Oh, by the way, I haven't contacted the farming authorities. So the sense of the law really puts the farming project in prime position, and the voltaic side comes afterwards. The farming world is like a lot of French people, tends to sit back and wait for someone to come and knock on the door, but it's not very proactive. And so how can we set up links between these two demands, or these two worlds, between operators, for example? How should the operators go about contacting the farming community? I think that when we go along the roads of France, we can see that the landscape doesn't require any particular skill. If we take the plasterer and the electrician, when we don't see their work, we can say, well, one could very easily do the work of another, but it's not that easy. It demands a certain know-how, which we don't necessarily measure from outside when we're not actually involved in the job. This. Our thinking was very much to look at the subject from another point of view, saying that from a collective stance, to think about our territory in terms of what we wanted and what we don't want, and with the possibly with the local authority, look at what we would like to do, and then go to see the operators and see what they have to offer. I think working in this way means that you can really count on the Chamber of Agriculture to work in that direction. This was our approach in any case. Up to now, we've blocked a number of projects because we didn't get all the answers in relation to the anxiety which was being expressed in the territory. The discussions with operators meant that we were able to remove certain obstacles. At the Chamber of Agriculture, we're encouraging local authorities to reassure one another. And I think for this reason, in our case at the Chamber of Agriculture, we have something like 52 operators who've been contacted over the last 2 years. Because you're here and you have to be able to hear this. Thanks coming along to say that we're going to save farming. We may be naive, but we're also a bit mistrustful. Our link with the land tells us that, there's no such thing as easy as a free lunch. And often, we put our happiness at stake. Question here, another question. These are our last two questions. Oh, there's a third one over here. What time are you going to be able to stay here till this evening? Good evening, Danny Diaz. I'm at the ELU design office. We were talking about compensation. I've been in PV for several years. And the essential element of its arrival is to protect production against climate change. So it's supposed to improve productivity and protect against harmful weather conditions. And here I can see that there's a slight shift taking place. Do farmers have to pay? No, sorry, I'm joking. Well, if the project is it has as much synergy as that. In certain cases, in most cases, the farmers will benefit. Apart, the synergy it can be calculated independently of the rents and service provision. In terms of the compensation debate, it's very complex. In fact, a real agrivoltaic project shouldn't have compensation, and yet we're seeing with all the issues related to sharing value and the fact that the farming world is very much aware that there will be no agrivoltaic project for all farmers, makes it necessary to find collective compensation, which makes it possible to have agricultural sustainability. We've been talking about this since the beginning of the conference. We've been talking about food sovereignty. There's a sovereignty which links us, food sovereignty, in a context where there's less and less fertile agricultural land. With the increase of the world population, we have a food sovereignty which goes well beyond our own French territory, and we have to be very vigilant in this area. And with the many crises that we're experiencing and the weather hazards that we're encountering, means that it has really brought out the fragility of our world food system. This is something which we don't always see. For instance, when we're outside the farming community, in the ex-Languedoc-Roussillon, there's a lot of fallow land, which might make you think that there's not that much need. Yeah, well, there's fallow and fallow, and in certain agricultural land zones, the fallow land is there because some of the plots which are being reused after a period of time, they have the cap as well, the Common Agricultural Policy, which requires this, meaning that these fallow lands are going to have to be put under cultivation. And over the last 2 years, we're seeing the conflict in Ukraine, which is really having an effect on this. So some of these plots which are non-exploited are subject to a lot of vigilance so that we don't use these so-called non-cultivatable lands for the wrong purposes. So another question here, and then we move on to the next sequence, to the next session. Short question, short answer. Hello, my question relates to Cédric. What position do you take for the FFPA, sorry, or the various people who are on the board? How can you make decisions when we don't have all the decrees? Is it non-categorical? Is it in our thinking? There are people who represent the different structures, and to make things easier to understand, we've set out for the information about the representative to see whether the proposals meet their expectations. There may be situations where today, for example, we don't have the right to ensure that the farmers are in a secure position because our mandate doesn't go as far as that. But we are finding an improvement with projects which have impact. We are awaiting the decree to make sure, to be clear about our own position and powers. Just to quickly answer that question, the decree in question should make it possible to really work in concrete terms, and this will be effective as of the end of February, the beginning of March, with a transitional period of 1 month, and this is non-retroactive, so everything decided up to now is decided, and we will. After this period, we will be able to work on this issue in real concrete terms. So I suggest now the other speakers in this roundtable come up for a second sequence, which could be called Agrivoltaiism, is today already, with Lise JAULMES, ecological engineer, agronomy referent, Antoine Hans, who's the regional manager for Languedoc-Roussillon EDF, And at TSC, we have Cédric, the Director of Agricultural Partnerships. So agrivoltaics is for tomorrow, but this depends on the crops. And with a change of approach from the developer's point of view, who are now integrating people with skills and a deep understanding of the farming world. And this is the case for you, Cédric, because you are a farmer of a cereal farm in the Haute-Saône. You were working in a well-known accountancy firm, say France, and a general director of a cooperative group in the north of France as well. You arrived at TSC at the beginning of 2022. This is a company specialized in solar power on roofs or on the ground, and you're shifting now towards. So you shifted towards agrivoltaics a couple of years ago because of the pressure put on degraded land by the developers, and so this is Cédric. You are now going to be. Do you remember you asked to have a picture? You were hoping for a great agrivoltaic project. So would you tell us a little bit about the existing techniques, depending on the crops and the terroir? So I'm going to hand. So this is feedback from a pedagogical point of view. So hello, everybody. So I'm going to take you on the road to happiness here. At least I'm going to try. And so I'd like to make it clear from the start. I prepared some visual images. It's always a lot easier with pictures and then long debates. So we want to look at what this looks like. And from my own experience, when we take farmers to the place where things are really happening, it really makes a difference. It's very important to have visuals. At TSC, what we do and the same similar solutions or other solutions are being developed by other organizations. Our colleagues or competitors are specialized in other crops, which we're not specialized in. So there's a place for everybody in this area. Okay, if you just go back one. No, I don't think I'm going in the right direction here. Okay, so I'm going to start with what it isn't. And basically what we weren't doing, but you've explained this at length earlier. We said it wasn't a good thing to convert a maize growing or a corn growing farm into sheep rearing. But when you have a real project, you say, okay, I'm going to put a few sheep on there. It's an agricultural project, and we're going to continue to use ground-based PV. People in the farming world, it's part of my job. I go into all the different regions, to professional farming organizations, corporate, and systematically, I haven't even got the time to open my PowerPoint when people say, oh, if you've coming to put sheep under our PV on our land, it's not a great picture, not a great image. And so you have to really spend a bit of time explaining what it really means and then what we want to do with it. So you asked me to go quickly. From a technological point of view, we developed two main types of technology. A canopy. You have to imagine panels which are at 5-6 meters off the ground, linked together by cables. So the posts are 27 meters distance, which makes it possible for almost all agricultural machinery to pass between these posts, particularly in main crop areas where they're more than 24 meters apart. In the photo, this is not virtual reality. This is reality itself. And this is a real picture with the spraying equipment. This is a soybean field. And so you can see these overhead PVs. And what is important to see is that with V2 and V3, the structure is much lighter, and visually you can see how much progress we've made in a year and a half. The idea being, or the challenge that we give to our technical experts, is to have 36 meters distance because the biggest sprayers need that distance. The idea being to be able to use all sorts of farming machinery. So the panels will follow the course of the sun throughout the day, and they will also provide a number of services through sensors, which mean that when there's hail, when it rains, they go vertical to allow the rain to reach the earth. If there's hail, they'll put themselves in a horizontal position. It's quite solid and robust. Originally, we were looking at something like 40% of the surface area covered. With the technological evolution, the panels are actually producing more, so the same quantity can be produced by fewer. So the idea being to continue to privilege the farming part.
So let's talk about agronomy. Is it favorable to agronomy? It was going to be very transparent, so I said not much. On the first year, the soybean crop was equivalent of between it was similar to what we did under the canopy, but the plot is suffering because, of course, we're making progress in terms of construction, but the soil was not in very good shape after the construction took place. 2 years later on, the wheat that was planted was better under the canopy than on the side. I know the region very well because I have a farm nearby, so it was the best year ever. We had yields that we never had before. So all of this means that there are new technologies and we need to learn how it works. There's a bit of fine-tuning to do. There are a lot of data to capture to understand what's happening or not happening. And I think that we are going to have to adapt varieties. The best wheats in the world are in Ireland, and there's not a lot of sun in Ireland, and they have the best yield in the north of Ireland. So if you're in Haute-Saône, it's probably better than Ireland. So the second major technology is a tracker technology. So I'm going to go from one slide to the next. Whether we're talking about massive cultures or farming, these are trackers that are being used. They're spaced 15 meters away from each other. They're going to follow the course of the sun throughout the day and make sure that there's shade at some point over the plot at some point of the day. The idea is that in order to do those interventions, the farmer must be able to move the panels so the machines can get by. So it seems easy to say to have a clicker to adjust the panel, and we understand what is the constraint of the farmer. But there's also the constraint of the energy producer who must make sure that the panel produces something because that's the end goal, to produce energy. So you can't just be like pretending like you're sitting in front of the TV and use the remote control all day long because it's an activity that has to be funded. We raise money to finance these projects, and we need to reassure the banker and tell him that it will produce the number of hours that is required. So this is part of the things that we learn and that we need to work on. So the trackers will be for low cultures, the canopy more for high crops. If you have corn that is going up to 2.5 meters, it's going to have to be a different type of panel than for the lower cultures. For farming, it's about the same on trackers that we have on farming. If we have, of course, sheep, cows, or chicken, the tracker is going to go lower or higher. So we need to adjust the techniques. For example, Wilson, if we do some rotation farming, if you cut the plot in 4 or in 5, the farmers don't like that so much. But having said that, the people who advise that say that it's very good in terms of performance for fodder crop. We don't waste anything, to be clear, particularly when it doesn't rain a lot. So when you're doing rotation farmer, the trackers on 3/4 of the plots, you know, they move, and we block them for only 1/4 of the plots. Last slide. These technologies are new. They're going to evolve because the climate is going to evolve. We were being pushed into it by the decree, but we're going to have to prove that we're going to be able to produce the same way in the future than we did before. In 40 years, the climate will have changed and the production will have changed because the needs of the consumers will not be the same. The labor force will not be the same. Some productions require more labor than others. And it's a big topic for agriculture. There'll be some innovation in varieties of plants, maybe. Maybe the people, you know, make seeds. They're going to find some varieties that grow with less shade or more shade. So nothing is set in stone. We build a lot of demonstrators in a lot of regions. When I joined TSO not very long ago, I was very surprised to see that it's a lot in the north of France. So I was thinking, yeah, you're going to live in the north and you're going to have to go work in the south. But no, I tend to stay in the north. And it seems like the farmers have a bigger appetite for and a bigger interest for these technological innovations than the farmers in the south. And however, we could imagine that they should have a higher interest in having those because they have more sun. Any questions in the room to explain what Cédric presented? Cédric COGNIEZ just presented. Hello, I have a question. On the canopy part, we can see that these are beautiful projects that work very well. The question is, for bigger size projects, we know we're going to be looking at economic models that are higher. Is it going to be sustainable? Because this on the demonstrator is a very small scale farm. Well, if you look at number of hectares, it's about the same megawatt per hectares. We need 3 hectares for a demonstrator. So we're really looking at areas that are big enough. 3 hectares is not nothing. And tomorrow our strategy is to adjust to what you're saying, 8 to 10 hectares maximum on projects close to each other and not too much either. So over a region, but we don't imagine building it over 30 hectares. Is there a link between the added value of the culture itself? So if there are 2 factors. The canopy, we have to be clear that in the stage that we're at, in 1 year, we really made a lot of progress in improving the system. It costs more money than to have a tracker. So it's more adjusted for the south of the country, which is silly because it's rather in the north that we want to do that, because in potatoes, they go 20 times with a spray to spray the potatoes at 36 meters. But our demonstrator is in the Somme, which is the north of France, in a farmer that grows potatoes and corn and just vegetables, so big cultures, big crops. So we have to adapt. The sense tracker is more for low culture, low-lying crops, and the canopy is more for higher crops. We also have an irrigation system that is integrated. It's if he has a ramp of 20 meters, it goes between the poles. So if the canopy is 500, 600 meters long, it can be adjusted to it. Or the one that we have in the Somme is not the one in the picture, but it looks like it. We have water cannons that are attached to the poles, and that will irrigate the plots. And we're also developing a system of aspersion from the top. So the farmer means that he's going to use 25% less water. Another question before we move on. Hello. You said about the productions that you tested over a year that we're pretty much at the same level, the same yield. What is the benefit for the farmers then if he produces less over the same plot of land? Well, this is the farmer speaking now. I speak under your control, but it also is also linked to nature, and nature changes from one year to the next. So if we feel that the first year was a little better under the canopy, to make it an absolute rule for every year and all the time and all cultures and all varieties, I wouldn't commit to that. And to say it was a little less good last year, I wouldn't go down that route either, because I don't know if you're a farmer, but my farmer was always a farmer. He said there's never one year that looks the other one. So intuitively, I think that some years it will be better because we'll have very big heat waves in May and June, and the canopy will protect the culture. And some years we'll have a weather that is not that good in the spring, where the canopy will be less effective. So we're going to have to play with it. Maybe let go more light in when the plants are flowering or blooming, and less if it's really, really hot out there. So let's keep the question, because you haven't fully answered. What is the point for a farmer if it produces less? Thank you. So beyond technology, if we can draw with 4 hands, how do we achieve a successful project? Agrivoltaïsme is the meeting of 2 worlds, 2 sectors, and it's about getting to know each other, starting with the developers. You are, I think, the living exception, Mr. Janin, who make the effort to integrate some skills, some people who have agronomy skills. So the exception with Lise JAULMES, you are agronomist engineer, and you've been working for VALECO, which exploits and develops wind farms, PV farms, etc. So a traditional developer. And so they have made you their referent in agronomy. So explain to us how a developer goes from a solar project to conceiving agrivoltaic projects with the agricultural sector. Yes, we decided to integrate the academic expertise within VALECO to better support the agrivoltaic projects. But before that, as you said, as an engineer specialized in the environment, I was supporting the integration of biodiversity within the solar plants. And we already had some plants that were built on fields, often on degraded fields, former wasteland or fallow land. And the farmer came to it later, and he wished to enhance the grass that was available under the panels. So we followed the link with agriculture, and we could see that there were several synergies, but that there were a lot of things to improve if we really wanted to put the farmer at the heart of the project. So these feedbacks are very useful today to design our agrivoltaic projects. It was mostly for farming, for cows and cattle. But we could really build this complementarity between the 2 sectors. So there's a team behind me. There's 4 agronomists at VALECO. And the idea is to, we also work with the biodiversity teams, because we have a lot of common topics linked to agroecology. We have a lot of synergy between those 2 themes. And the idea to support the farmers is not to replace them. We want to have a good dialogue between the teams who are specialized on energy and the farmers, who will be project leaders as much as we are. So the idea is to exchange with them throughout the project. So we'll meet to discuss how we adapt our implementation, our setup to their activity. We're going to listen to their needs. And it's not only with the farmers, we also work with studies, engineering studies. We have the expertise, but we're not only counting on our own expertise. We ask for outside opinion. I'd like to go back to what the operator said early on, is what is the input? If I'm a developer, I'm going to look at the potential of raise, the land, the topography, the connection, and from there I try to build something. So you have those data, but how do you make the choice, even from an agricultural point of view, without putting it at the same level than the connection? Do you have an entry point when you choose a particular site? Yes, of course, because before we had a site where we knew we're going to have 1 mega for 1 hectare, and now it's not the case. Now we study the site from a farming point of view, and then we decide how we're gonna put the panels, where we're gonna put the panels. So we're not doing it alone. We're doing it side by side with the farmer. So it takes longer because we're two in the same boat. And we also liaise with other people, because now we liaise with the agriculture expertise, and we have a commission, the CDPF, which replaces the CDNPF that we don't have so much. So it's the different layers, and it's a big challenge for the energy sector to integrate agronomy without replacing the farmer, who has to stay on top of his farm. And there are a lot of challenges because there's a real agricultural activity that is going to continue. So it requires a lot of trust. Behind there's some banks who need to be reassured to make sure that the farm runs smoothly. So how do you do this meshing of all these stakeholders? It's the word trust is key here. It's a relationship that is based between the farmer and the energy producer. And to make sure that this relationship lasts, we talked about contracts, but we also it's also about the way we're going to build the project. And even we file for the permits, we cannot do it without the farmer. So if we don't have a farmer, we don't have an agrivoltaic project. And we've integrated that point. And this is going to last for a long time. So as of from the design stage, we need to implement it differently. And before, we knew that we had the diversity constraints because we wanted to keep the ecological services on the plot of land. We still have the same constraints of biodiversity. But now we want to bring services, and to maintain those services, we need to monitor it and do some follow-up. But there are going to be some experts involved, and so we integrate the agronomic expertise, we have partners, and we integrate R&D, which we didn't do before. Because, of course, we always had research on the PV done by the PV manufacturers. Now we do research on what works in agrivoltaic, as the gentleman from TSC presented. And we are insisting from the beginning of those projects as of 2020. And we have a test in Charolles, in Saône-et-Loire, with the Chamber of Agriculture and the Agriculture High School, because we're going to have to train the farmers as well from a young age when they start buying a farm. Yeah, I would like to give a mic to Luc Janin so he could tell us about this experiment, to explain to us why they decided to go down that route and what are the results. How do you train the farmer for the project? Well, the training starts with a co-design because everybody brings their own culture from their sector. And the transmission of the project, if it's a young farmer who, after 10 years of exploitation of the farm, how will he have the right keys, tools to manage it as best as possible with the PV panels? Because sometimes the shade will be a plus, sometimes a minus, but we'll have to work with it. That's why we have the agricultural high school, part of the experiment, because we hope that these high schools will be really playing a big role in it. There are also some other schools, because it is all about training the farmers of tomorrow. Thank you, Luc Janin. Maybe you can tell us more about this experiment. Since we don't always have the right answer, I came with a joker. I'm going to give the floor to Laurent, who works with us and who follows this experiment very closely. Hello, everyone. I'm in charge of the follow-up of the experiment that is conducted in Charolles. What was it put in place? Well, to reassure the farmers on how the grass was going to grow under the panels and how the animals were going to react with this new structure in the middle of the farm. So very quickly, the sheep found shade. So in terms of well-being, it was a good thing. But looking at the grass, it wouldn't grow as much as usual. There's a few adjustments to make sure that we can optimize all that. So we started with the first demonstrator. We're looking at panels that were vertical. So 2 tables of 4 meters positioned vertically. And after 2 years of functioning, we decided that it's not a problem of light, it's a problem of the water under the tables. So we have to have an orientation on the what we call the landscape format. And what is interesting is we're in an agricultural high school, so there are a lot of young people coming. And we have young people who are curious, who take an interest, and we receive a lot of public. So it's this way we can really explain and things and make people more confident in those projects. And 2 weeks ago, we received some people coming representing associations who were against photovoltaic. But I don't know if we changed their mind, but at least we seem to have reassured them a bit. Yes, nuance is not always easy. Thank you. Last touch to our collective painting before the last Q&A session. No, we talked about that, sharing the value, sharing added value. I don't know if you heard it, but our Minister of the Energy Transition, I think she said that it was the elephant in the room, talking about agrivoltaicism, sharing added value, because agrivoltaicism is an opportunity, but it could also be a challenge for the rural areas. The draft decree mentions this sharing of added value, and the developers are trying to anticipate. And how? This is the question I asked to Antoine Hans. You're the regional director of renewables for Languedoc-Roussillon, EDF Renouvelable, for Languedoc-Roussillon. So how can a developer orientate a project for a better sharing of added value? Thank you. Thank you for inviting me at this roundtable. I believe that I think you said it was a shady topic, a gray area, so I'm happy to share my experience on that. We need to be humble when we talk about agrivoltaicism because I'm coming from a non-expert. I don't come from the agriculture sector. I'm a developer, so we have to be humble. Mr. Janin talked about it as well. But at EDF Renewable, we're convinced that agrivoltaicism is one of the options that are in front of us. And at the national level, we have 10 to 15% of our projects that are designed with agrivoltaicism. And I think this percentage is going to grow. So how can we combine agriculture and how can we make a beautiful wedding between agriculture and energy production? It has to be a win-win relationship. And I think we need to think as a group and case by case. So we need to adjust, we need to be agile, and we need to also adjust to the region and the type of culture that we're dealing with. So I apologize because I'm probably going to ask more questions than I'm going to bring answers, but to share some feedbacks that we have on other projects outside of agri-PV, because this sharing of value is not new for renewables. We develop wind farms, PVs, agri-PVs, and some wind farms that are regional projects. Before all, to just give you one example, in the Pyrénées-Orientales, a wind park of 30 windmills, we created a structure that is managed by the collectivity, and they do projects with innovation, agriculture, ENRs, and tourism, renewables and tourism. So we could set up a sheep farm in one town, and what I'm trying to say is we have been working with the agriculture sector for a while. To give you another example, in the west, still the southwest of France, we're working on an agri-PV project, and our point of entry was the region and the grouping of farmers, the collectivities of farmers. So we go into towns and we ask them what their requirements and how we can integrate a project, and then we consult the farmers, rather the associations of farmers, because it has to be done as a group, and maybe it extends the deadline of development, but it's also about thinking a project as a group. I see three potential actors, the two actors that we named a few times, the agricultural world and the local collectivities, and the energy producers. If we're looking at models of value sharing, everything is to be created. Nobody has an answer today. Even the decree itself is not voted yet. So I think there are as many choices as different. There are as many different choices than as different motivations for the people who want to be part of it. We can quote the agriculture funds. Why not? That we should. There'll be some. It would trickle down for everyone. Also, stakeholders, people would take shares in a company, and how would it be beneficial for the community? So there could be these kinds of schemes. But sharing the value has to be defined. What do we mean by value? Who defines value? I don't have all the answers. Everybody's sitting around the business plan. No, I'm talking about the collective value and the value of the projects at the level of the region. And then We mentioned it earlier with the APER law and the decree of sharing value that introduced this notion not only on agri-PV projects, but also on traditional PVs and wind projects for the energy transition and the protection of biodiversity. So as many solutions as can be deployed.
I'd also say that basic strategy that we have is to discuss, once again, to be humble, working with the farming world and consulting people. At the Chamber of Agriculture, you are one of the 50-odd operators that we were talking about. Our approach in relation to is at local level and also based on farming, which is this is the front door really to our approach. So I suggest we have a final sequence. And this is a Q&A session with fundamental questions as well. I have one to start off with, which gives you time to think about your questions. This is rather a naive question, actually. I'm thinking about, this is an open question for everybody, but what is the ideal size of an agrivoltaic project? Right, the answer is, the ideal size for us relates to the agricultural project that we start off with. So you have to be able to do things in measure, share values, accept the idea of sharing values. 15, 20, 30 hectares seems to be a measured project. Beyond that, things might be complicated. Why? Well, because the scale of a farm, it depends on the number of farmers involved. There's a scale of the farm itself, the method, ways of doing things. It's necessary to adapt. We have to be able to find improvements, feedback, and adapt the structure, but also we have to be able to adapt to the evolution of farming. We're looking at a period of 30 years. And so we have to be able to make sure that the plot can be transmitted in the best possible conditions. So there are all the specificities of the farming world which encounter the specificities of energy, and to improve all these different actions and to limit the risks of transmission, etc., it seems reasonable to be working on the basis of a scale which will improve the acceptability of this sector. So we can, you may have a different vision, a different view. We have a rather shy audience here, I think. So, yeah, I'd just like to come back to what's been said, which this is an interesting question, which is the right size of a agri-PV project is the one that relates to that actual project. With agrivoltaicism, what's important is that it also makes it possible to design the farmer, to see the farmer as he is today, as an entrepreneur. In France, we tend to have this old-fashioned view of the farmer who was a man, not that young, with a bit of a belly, and who doesn't really know how to do much more than farm. And this is absolutely not true. We have farmer entrepreneurs, we have technicians, people who work with very complex technical issues, and we're both farmers, and we're both farmers, but we do have very different types of farms. And I think that today we have to accept the fact that farmers need to diversify their revenue sources. And we were talking about this earlier. If we look at the number of hours that we work per year, and we relate this to what we actually get at the end of the month in terms of hourly rate, nobody would agree to work in conditions like that other than farmers. So, if you're interested in money, it's not a good idea to be a farmer. But what's important as well is that the people who produce food for French people are able to feed themselves at the end of the month. Farmers, without wanting to be millionaires, and nevertheless have to be able to get their farms to function properly, they feed their family and their animals and the people who depend on them. And we mustn't overlook this. Are there other questions or reactions from the audience? No? One question at the back. Hello. Agrivoltaic is not opposed to food security, but there are several types of farming. I come from the Charente area. We do cognac. Sorry, cognac is wine that is distilled, heated with gas. If we cover the vines with solar panels, I don't see how this is going to affect food safety in the country. Maybe I think this is worthy of a comment. Yes, as I was saying, there's a very small part of the territory which is concerned by agrivoltaic projects, so we're not going to necessarily relate to the question of food safety or food security. We're working with the agricultural ministry and others. And the question arises as to the fact that in cognac, for instance, you don't produce food as such. But this doesn't devalue the projects whereby it is the case. A question over here. The Malimont wine used to be grown in this area. People from the area will recognize this. How can a farmer commit, because solar panels or relates to the farmer, how can a farmer relate to a period of 25 years, 30 years, or the climate regulations, for example, and climate changes? This is a real question. In fact, in both cases, farmers don't necessarily want to put solar panels up on their vines straight away. There are issues that might arise tomorrow which don't exist today, and it does also create a whole range of questions. My colleague here was right in saying that we have to move forward at a certain point. But if I have a request to make, in relation to this decree, as we go forward, more questions will arise. And I think what we would like to see is the possibility of the territory to come in terms of what they can do in their own territory. Because if we're working in the Parisian area or in the Médoc, we don't necessarily have the same constraints and objectives. A territory can be preserved because in what Antoine Hans was saying, what I was hearing was that the local authority was a kind of guarantor for the general interests. What territory are you referring to? I think that there are entities with a very precise view of their territory. From a professional point of view, there are prefects, there's a whole structure which whereby the territory is identified in relation to its production. But in terms of the projects, I think the local authority or a group of local authorities would be quite an interesting scale to work on. They're already very involved, and so it would be important to enlist their involvement. A very last question now. Yes, over there. Hello. Just a question about sharing value. What do you think about the GUFA and sending and really directing funds at the GUFA? Could you tell us what a GUFA is, please? Yes, thanks for the question. It's a group of agricultural financing, so it's with higher investments than an individual farmer could raise. So the relationship to involve GUFAs is one possibility. It's one way of sharing value. But as we were saying earlier, one of the traps is to multiply the actors that we referred to and to whom we give a share of the value. And it's important for the people who produce the products to be actually the ones who benefit from them. Yeah, I just want to say that quite modestly, we've thought about this on the scale of our own department, and we really claim rights related to our own territory. We have a common fund, which can be governed by the departmental bodies related to the territory. Because here, if agrivoltaicism really does get off the ground, we have to make sure that we continue to put PVs on roofs and continue in this direction. It's also a need. It's a real need as well in terms of energy. Because we know that there's a certain loss on the grid and on the line, along the lines. Thank you, all of you. Thank you for this round table discussion. Thank you for your participation, and see you tomorrow for the continuation of Anna Gaia, and for agrivoltaic. We'll leave that for next year.